The moment it happened, half the courthouse froze. It wasn't the sound of the slap that stunned everyone. It was the silence that followed. A white woman in a beige suit, shaking with anger, her hand still midair. And standing in front of her, calm as a stone under fire, was a tall black man in a dark charcoal suit who hadn't even flinched. For a second, no one could process what they'd just seen. The woman's voice broke the air first, shrill, shaking, full of that kind of authority only someone used to getting their way ever uses. "You people think you can just park anywhere," she hissed. And that was when the man's ID badge slipped from his hand to the pavement gleaming under the sun, a small metallic rectangle that said Hon Judge Marcus Ellison, County District Court. By the time she realized what she had done, her face turned the color of chalk. But it was already too late. The cameras were rolling, courthouse security was watching, and one officer was already moving toward her with a radio pressed to his shoulder. The woman tried to backpedal, muttering about confusion and self-defense. But Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice once. He just straightened his tie, looked her dead in the eye, and said quietly, "Ma'am, I suggest you call your lawyer. You're going to need her." That line alone would have gone viral if it weren't for what came next. Because the woman wasn't just any angry passerby. She was Karen Hollings, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, one of the most notoriously controlling HOAs in the entire county. And the man she had just hit right outside his own courthouse wasn't only a judge. He was also the registered owner of one of the homes her HOA had been trying to fine, evict, and harass for months. 3 days before that slap, Marcus had been standing in his driveway, holding yet another bright orange violation notice taped to his mailbox. "Improper exterior lighting," it read in bold. Beneath it, in smaller type, "Failure to comply within 7 days will result in a $350 fine." He'd laughed quietly to himself. The improper lighting was a solar lamp his late father had installed 10 years ago, the only light that marked his walkway. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who lost his temper easily. His colleagues at the courthouse called him the calm before the verdict, but Maple Grove was testing every limit he had. It wasn't the fines that bothered him, it was the tone of the letters, always cold, condescending like he was being scolded. "You people never read the rules," one of the HOA members had once said at a meeting, not realizing Marcus was within earshot. He'd noted the phrasing. He always noted the phrasing. That week alone, his mailbox had collected 6 letters. Grass too tall, trash bins visible, decorative flag not in accordance with community standards. It was the kind of list you'd expect from a neighborhood war zone, not a cul-de-sac lined with identical beige houses and trimmed lawns. But the HOA, under Karen Hollings' iron hand, ruled Maple Grove like a small kingdom. And Karen loved nothing more than reminding people who the queen was. 2 streets over, Karen was hosting one of her compliance walks. Clipboard in E. Hand sunglasses perched high, she inspected porches like a general on parade. "Section 4.2b, awnings must be neutral colors only," she recited aloud, jotting notes about a neighbor's gray patio umbrella. Her assistant, a timid retiree named Melinda, nodded nervously behind her. "Should we maybe let the new homeowner know first?" she asked. Karen's lips tightened. "If they wanted leniency, they should have bought outside the Grove," she said flatly. The Grove had been her empire for 8 years. Under her watch, the HOA fined families for everything from leaving recycling bins visible to playing music after 8 p.m. She'd made enemies, sure, but nobody ever dared confront her. Not until Marcus moved in. To her, he was just another renter type in a house she assumed wasn't really his. He didn't come to barbecues, didn't attend meetings, didn't bow to her clipboard. That alone made him suspicious. When she saw his car parked outside the courthouse 3 days later, same plates she'd cited twice for overnight parking, she decided to teach him a lesson. In her mind, It was just another case of a non-compliant resident stepping out of line. She had no idea who she was about to put her hands on. Inside the courthouse lobby that morning, Marcus was calm, reviewing case files. He had no idea that Karen had followed him from the parking lot, muttering under her breath about rules and attitude. A security guard noticed her pacing near the entrance, but assumed she was waiting for someone. When Marcus stepped out onto the steps for a phone call, she stormed forward, waving a folded HOA letter in his face. "You think you're above community standards because you wear a suit?" she snapped. He blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, stepping closer. "You ignored 3 citations, parked in a visitor space again, and now you think you can just stroll into court like—" He raised a hand, trying to defuse it. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think—" That's when she hit him. It wasn't hard, but it was loud. Enough to draw every eye in the plaza, and enough to end her career before lunchtime. When security escorted her out, Karen screamed about misunderstandings and threats. "He started it!" she yelled, pointing at Marcus. "He provoked me!" But every camera, every witness, every bystander said otherwise. Within hours, the courthouse footage hit the local news. The segment ran under the headline, "HOA President Strikes County Judge in Public Altercation." By sunset, Marcus's phone was blowing up with calls from reporters, colleagues, even the mayor. But Marcus didn't give any statement. He didn't need to. The system he served was about to do the talking for him. What Karen didn't know, what no one in Maple Grove knew yet, was that Judge Marcus Ellison had just been assigned a new civil docket. And the first case on his desk was Maple Grove Homeowners Association vs. County of Riverside. The same HOA she ran. And when she saw his name on that docket 2 days later, right above the words presiding judge, her knees nearly gave out. Because for the first time in her life, Karen Hollings wasn't holding the clipboard. She was the one being judged. When the news broke, Maple Grove looked like a stage where the actors had forgotten their lines. Neighbors whispered in driveways, sprinklers clicked over perfect lawns, and every phone screen glowed with the same headline: HOA President Arrested for Assaulting County Judge. Karen stayed inside her 2-story colonial that morning. Curtains drawn tight, phone buzzing nonstop. Channel 8 parked a van by the community gate. Her husband Neil, a mortgage broker with a perpetual golf tan, pleaded with her to stay quiet. "Just wait it out, Karen. It'll blow over." It always does, but it didn't. Because 3 miles away, Judge Ellison was sitting behind his oak panel desk, flipping through the thick binder of Maple Grove Homeowners Association versus County of Riverside. The case wasn't new. Months of disputes over drainage easements, over collection of dues, and a suspicious construction budget. But now that the presiding judge had a personal interest, every comma mattered. He didn't recuse himself immediately. Instead, he flagged the conflict for review, following the book to the letter. He wanted transparency. That's what separated justice from vengeance. Still, the irony wasn't lost on him. The same woman who had slapped him for thinking he was above the rules was the one bending every rule she could find. Down in Maple Grove, the board tried damage control. Acting VP Melinda scheduled an emergency meeting. She printed statements, highlighted bylaws, practiced her "we must remain united" speech. But only 8 people showed up, and half brought printed screenshots of Karen's arrest report. "Is it true she hit a judge?" asked one gray-haired man. Melinda nodded miserably. "Technically, yes, but he's one of our homeowners, right?" Another interrupted. Silence. You could almost hear the HOA crumble. For the first time, residents began to question everything. The constant fines, the mandatory landscaping contracts, the rumor that Karen's brother-in-law owned the paving company the HOA kept hiring for sidewalk maintenance. By evening, a small group of neighbors gathered at Marcus's porch with coffee cups and quiet apologies. One woman, Mrs. Jenkins, cleared her throat. "Judge Ellison, sir. We didn't know she was treating you like that. We thought you were some tenant she didn't like." Marcus smiled politely. "That's usually how bullies work. They count on people not knowing. He didn't promise revenge. He didn't need to. The law was already spinning its gears. Meanwhile, Karen's pride cracked faster than she expected. Her inbox filled with suspension notices. The HOA's insurance carrier froze their policy pending investigation. The city attorney's office called to confirm a hearing date on allegations of harassment and discrimination. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, muttering to herself, "They're exaggerating. It was one slap. He provoked me. He parked in the wrong zone." But deep down, she could feel the ground shifting. She opened her laptop to check HOA files, minutes, invoices, payment approvals, and for the first time, she saw them the way someone like Judge Ellison would, messy, inconsistent, and dangerous. There were duplicate payments to Riverside Maintenance LLC, a company registered to an address suspiciously close to her brother's. There were fines issued without signatures. Even emails with edited timestamps, she whispered. Oh, God. Because if Marcus Ellison, the county judge, ever looked closely at those records, her slap wouldn't just end her presidency, it could end her freedom. 2 nights later, a white SUV stopped outside Marcus's driveway. Karen stepped out wearing dark glasses, holding an envelope. He was watering his front hedge under the porch light when he saw her. She froze halfway up the walkway. "Judge Ellison," she said softly, almost trembling. "I came to apologize." He didn't move. Water hissed against the grass. "I lost my temper that day," she continued. "It's not who I am. The media twisted everything. He finally turned the hose off." "The media didn't twist your hand, ma'am," she flinched. "Please, can we just handle this privately? Maybe drop the complaint? I can resign from the HOA quietly. I'll even issue a statement." Marcus folded the hose neatly. "Mrs. Hollings, this isn't about one incident. It's about accountability. For years, you've treated homeowners like subjects. Maybe it's time someone reminds you the law doesn't stop at the gate." Her eyes welled up, half fury, half fear. "You're ruining my life." He shook his head. "No. You did that the moment you decided to raise your hand instead of your standards." She left the envelope on his porch, an unsigned letter of apology, and drove off into the dark, taillights trembling like a heartbeat fading. The next morning, county investigators requested full HOA financials. The subpoena was public. Local papers printed every detail. Karen's photograph, mid-shout, mid-slap, became the county's cautionary meme of the week. Marcus never gloated. In chambers, he quietly reassigned the Maple Grove case to a colleague to avoid conflict of interest, but he provided a formal statement about the incident. His words were clinical, but the closing line struck like a gavel. "Justice is not a feeling we deliver. It's a structure we maintain, even for those who tear at its walls." By week's end, half the HOA board resigned. The county audit exposed $78,000 in unaccounted beautification funds. Contractors admitted they'd been pressured to over-invoice. The HOA's accounts were frozen. The community website went offline. Karen sat alone in her SUV at dusk, watching residents pull down the Maple Grove Pride banners she'd ordered last summer. A child on a scooter paused to read the taped sign on the clubhouse door, "Closed pending investigation." For the first time in years, nobody nodded when they saw her. Nobody waved. She turned the key, but her hands were shaking too much to drive. In that silence, she finally understood what Marcus Ellison had meant. The law doesn't stop at the gate. That night, Marcus sat by his porch lamp, the same solar light the HOA once called improper. It flickered gently over a stack of letters he'd kept from his father, who'd been a civil rights attorney in the same county decades ago. In one letter, his father had written, "Sometimes, son, you won't have to fight back. Just stand and let the truth show what it really hits." He smiled faintly, folded the letter, and looked out at Maple Grove, quiet now, humbled. He knew this wasn't over yet. Karen still had cards to play, lawsuits, appeals, desperate moves. But for the first time, the balance had shifted, and he wasn't the only one holding receipts anymore. The courthouse was overflowing that morning. Reporters packed the marble steps, microphones flashing like insects under the summer sun. Inside, every bench creaked with tension. It wasn't every day that a homeowners association, an entire governing board of an affluent community, was under criminal review. But this wasn't any ordinary HOA. This was Maple Grove. And this hearing wasn't just about misused funds. It was about power, prejudice, and what happens when both go unchecked for too long. Judge Rivera presided that day, a colleague of Marcus Ellison's, known for her sharp tone and zero patience for theatrics. Marcus sat in the audience, calm, unreadable, his name cleared from the case record to avoid conflict of interest. But everyone in the room knew the story. They knew who had struck whom. They knew why the county investigators were there. And they definitely knew the woman standing at the defense table, shoulders stiff, hair pulled back too tight, was the same Karen Hollings whose meltdown outside court had made national headlines 2 weeks ago. Karen adjusted her blazer, eyes darting between the jury box and the cameras. She'd dressed carefully, swapping her usual HOA purple for a conservative gray suit, pearls, and a forced smile. Her new attorney, a nervous young man from a local firm, leaned over and whispered, "Just stay composed. Let me do the talking." She nodded, but her mind was spinning. She couldn't believe how quickly the world had turned against her. One moment she was running Maple Grove like a queen, issuing fines and orders. Now she was the defendant in a public hearing about financial impropriety, abuse of authority, and racial harassment. She glanced toward the gallery neighbors she'd once scolded, sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering. Even Melinda, her old assistant, sat in the back row, avoiding her gaze. When the bailiff called for silence, the tension could have cut glass. County of Riverside versus Maple Grove Homeowners Association, Judge Rivera announced. Charges include willful misuse of community funds, falsification of invoices, and violation of housing anti-discrimination statutes. Opening statements. The prosecutor, a tall man in navy with a voice like carved stone, stepped forward. Your Honor, this case isn't about a single slap or even one person's temper. It's about a pattern, a system run like a private fiefdom, where certain residents were targeted, fined, and silenced while others were favored. We intend to show that Maple Grove HOA, under Mrs. Hollings' leadership, systematically violated the law. And we will show that her assault on Judge Ellison was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of unchecked arrogance and prejudice. Karen's jaw tightened. Her lawyer tried to object. Irrelevant character argument. But Judge Rivera waved him off. Proceed. The court will decide relevance. The prosecutor turned toward the first row. Your Honor, the people call their first witness, Mr. Daniel Jenkins. An older man stood from the front bench, hat in hand. Karen's stomach dropped. Mr. Jenkins was one of her own neighbors, the one she'd fined 3 times for unsightly mailbox design. He walked to the stand. Slow but steady. Mr. Jenkins, the prosecutor began, how long have you lived in Maple Grove? 21 years. And during Mrs. Hollings' tenure, how many citations did you receive? He chuckled bitterly. 36, give or take, the courtroom murmured. And were those citations ever fairly reviewed? No, sir. Every time we tried to appeal, she chaired the meeting herself. She'd smile and say, "We enforce harmony here." And when you say we, you mean? Her, he said. It was always her. Karen shifted in her seat, cheeks burning. The prosecutor clicked a remote. On the monitor behind him appeared an email dated March 14th. Target properties flagged, 422 Maple, 416 Birch, 428 Elm non-compliant exterior features. Prioritize enforcement. It was signed, K. Hollings. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, we found multiple emails like this where enforcement priority was directed at specific homes. Do you recognize these addresses, Mrs. Hollings? Karen's lawyer objected again. These don't prove intent, they prove pattern, Judge Rivera said flatly. Objection overruled. By noon, the evidence stacked like bricks. Duplicate payments to Karen's brother's company, a landscaping invoice for $8,400 with no record of work performed. And then the smoking gun. A digital audit trail from the HOA's internal portal showing that several meeting minutes had been edited retroactively after fines were issued to fabricate board approval. Each revelation hit harder than the last, but the moment that broke her composure came unexpectedly. Your Honor, said the prosecutor. "The people call their next witness the Honorable Judge Marcus Ellison." The room shifted. Every camera turned. Karen's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Marcus rose calmly, his black suit crisp, expression unreadable. He stepped into the witness box with quiet authority, placed his hand on the oath Bible, and said softly, "I do." "Judge Ellison," the prosecutor began, "we understand you recused yourself from this case, but you agreed to testify regarding your personal experiences as a homeowner in Maple Grove. Can you describe those experiences for the court?" Marcus's gaze stayed steady. "Yes. In the time I've lived there, I've received 12 violations. Most were baseless. I attempted to attend an HOA meeting to address them, but was told the meeting was members only, despite being a titled homeowner. When I asked for documentation, I was ignored, and when I persisted, I was told my presence made the board uncomfortable." Karen fidgeted, whispering to her attorney. The prosecutor nodded. "And is it true, sir, that 3 days before the incident outside this courthouse, you received another citation?" "Yes," Marcus said. "For an exterior light my late father installed 10 years ago." "And what happened outside the courthouse?" Marcus paused. "She confronted me, accused me of violating HOA rules. I told her she was mistaken. She struck me." The room fell silent. "And what did you say to her afterward?" Marcus looked straight ahead. "I told her to call her lawyer, because justice was coming whether she wanted it or not." Even Judge Rivera glanced up from her notes. The gallery stirred, low murmurs rippling. Karen lowered her head, trying to keep her tears from showing. When cross-examination came, her lawyer tried desperately to pivot. "Judge Ellison, isn't it true that you could have escalated this matter out of personal bias after the altercation?" Marcus tilted his head. "Sir, I didn't need to escalate anything. The truth did that for me." Even the stenographer paused for a second before resuming typing. By afternoon recess, Karen's defense strategy had crumbled. Witnesses described intimidation emails, forged approvals, and threats of liens. One elderly widow described crying on the phone as Karen told her, "If you can't afford compliance, maybe you don't belong here." The courtroom was silent except for the quiet hum of ceiling fans. When Judge Rivera reconvened, she looked directly at Karen. "Mrs. Hollings, you'll have a chance to make a statement before sentencing. Use it wisely." Karen stood shakily, gripping the table edge. "Your Honor, I didn't mean for any of this to go so far. I thought I was keeping order. People were letting the neighborhood slip. I just wanted standards. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Her voice cracked. Judge Rivera leaned forward. "Standards don't excuse cruelty. You let authority turn into ownership. And that's not order, that's oppression." She turned to the jury foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with silver hair, rose. "We have, Your Honor." The clerk handed the slip across the bench. Judge Rivera read aloud. "On counts of financial misconduct, guilty. On counts of falsification of HOA records, guilty. On counts of harassment and discriminatory enforcement, guilty." Gasps, murmurs. Karen's knees gave way. Her lawyer caught her arm. Judge Rivera's gavel came down once. "Sentencing will be determined pending restitution hearing." Court adjourned. Outside, sunlight poured over the courthouse steps like absolution. Reporters swarmed. Microphones flashed. But Marcus Ellison didn't speak to the cameras. He simply walked past them, slow and steady, pausing for a moment beside the courthouse railing where the altercation had happened weeks earlier. He touched the spot on his cheek where she had struck him, then looked up at the skyline. Justice hadn't shouted that day. It had whispered through paperwork, patience, and proof, and the whisper had become an echo that would haunt Maple Grove forever. The days after the verdict felt like an earthquake in Maple Grove. The neighborhood that once ran on control and fear now ran on whispers and disbelief. Mailboxes overflowed with HOA refund notices, old fines reversed by court order, and letters stamped with the words "restitution pending." Residents who once hid behind their blinds stepped into the streets again, talking, smiling, almost like they were meeting for the first time. The community clubhouse, once Karen's fortress of authority, was boarded up with yellow tape and a city seal. In its place, the county posted a notice. "Under audit. records held by the Office of Property Affairs. Karen's house at the end of Birch Lane looked like the last fortress of a fallen queen. The flagpole was bare, the flower beds overgrown. Every few hours, delivery vans pulled up process servers dropping off new envelopes, civil claims, tax notices, subpoenas. She stopped answering the door. The evening news ran a special titled, "The HOA That Went Too Far," a montage of angry residents. Courtroom footage and Marcus's quiet testimony played beneath the anchor's calm voice. Tonight, the former president of Maple Grove faces up to 5 years in prison and full restitution for financial losses estimated at $78,000, the anchor said. Experts say the case could redefine accountability for homeowners associations nationwide. Karen watched it alone from her couch. Her hands trembled around a cup of cold tea. The reporter's tone wasn't cruel, it was matter of fact, the way news reads an obituary for someone still breathing. She reached for her phone, scrolled through her messages. Her lawyer had withdrawn representation. The HOA insurance refused to cover legal costs under the fraud exclusion clause. And one by one, the few friends she'd had in the neighborhood had stopped replying. The power she'd clung to for years had evaporated. All that was left was the echo of her own authority, empty, fragile, meaningless. Meanwhile, Marcus wasn't celebrating. He didn't post statements or call press conferences. He kept his schedule quiet, still driving the same modest car, still watering the same hedge by the same solar light that started it all. But inside the county offices, something remarkable began. Other judges and city officials started reviewing HOA complaint procedures. What they found was bigger than Maple Grove, dozens of smaller HOAs using similar tactics, unchecked and unaccountable. Marcus didn't push himself into the headlines, but his calm testimony had triggered a domino effect. The county formed a homeowner fair practice task force. It wasn't flashy, but it was real reform, clearer appeals process, limits on fines, financial disclosure rules. For the first time in years, homeowners in neighboring communities felt seen. When reporters asked Marcus about the new initiative, he simply said, "No community should be ruled by fear of a signature." That line went viral. It became the headline quote in 3 national articles. Karen's sentencing day came quietly. No cameras this time, just a half-empty courtroom, her new public defender, and a single family member, her husband Neil, sitting stiffly in the second row. She stood before the same bench where she'd once slapped a man she didn't recognize as a judge. The same sunlight filtered through the same glass panels. Only now it looked harsher. Judge Rivera spoke softly. "Mrs. Hollings, you've expressed remorse, but the court must weigh the scale of harm you caused. Financial misconduct, discrimination, and physical assault are serious crimes. The court sentences you to 18 months county supervision, 300 hours community service, and restitution of $78,000 to the Maple Grove Residents Fund." Karen nodded faintly. "No tears, no protest, just exhaustion. And one more condition," Judge Rivera added. "You are barred from holding any administrative or managerial position in any homeowners association or property management entity for 10 years. That broke her. She let out a dry, choking sound, a sob without tears. For 8 years, her identity had been tied to her clipboard, her bylaws, her control. Now she was officially banned from everything that once made her important. Marcus wasn't there that day. He didn't need to be. Justice had already spoken. In Maple Grove, a new board was elected, 5 residents who'd once been too afraid to even attend meetings. They opened the financial books to the public, held community barbecues, and turned the HOA website into a forum for neighbor help instead of neighbor complaints. The first act of the new board was symbolic but powerful. They restored Marcus Ellison's property rights, erased every false violation, and renamed the community park sign in honor of fairness. It now read, "Ellison Park, where every home has a voice." That unveiling day, the whole neighborhood gathered. Kids ran on the grass. Old residents brought lawn chairs. When Marcus arrived quietly, people applauded. He didn't make a speech, just smiled, nodding humbly. But later, as the crowd thinned and the sun sank low, Mrs. Jenkins came over with lemonade and said softly, "Feels like we got our home back." Marcus smiled. "No, ma'am. You built it back yourselves. The old solar lamp flickered to life behind him, steadier now, brighter. A small glowing symbol that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shines. A month later, Karen packed her things. A for sale sign tilted in her lawn. As she locked the door for the last time, she paused at the edge of the porch and looked down the street. Every driveway she'd once controlled now belonged to someone she'd underestimated. And at the far end of the cul-de-sac, Judge Marcus Ellison's house stood quiet under the morning sun. She thought about knocking, saying sorry again. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, she whispered to herself, I should have read more than the rules. I should have read the law. Then she got in her car and drove away past the gate that no longer bore her authority, past the sign that now bore his name. Weeks later, Marcus was asked to speak at a county forum on fair governance. He stepped up to the podium wearing his usual calm smile. The audience waited for a grand speech, but he kept it simple. There are two kinds of power, he said, the kind that silences others and the kind that listens. Only one of them survives the test of sunlight. The crowd applauded quietly. Outside, a reporter asked him what it felt like to have the woman who struck him publicly disgraced. He thought for a moment, then said, She didn't lose because she hit me. She lost because she hit truth, and truth doesn't bruise. When he drove back home that evening, the sky was wide and gold, the kind of light that feels like forgiveness. Kids were still playing in the park. The HOA newsletter now opened with, Community means everyone. He smiled, parked the car, and walked up to his porch. The same lamp glowed softly at his feet. He reached out, turned it off, and whispered, Rest now, Dad. The light held. The wind carried the sound through the trees, past fences, across the quiet, reformed streets of Maple Grove, where for the first time in years, peace didn't need permission. He watched her walk away. Karen Hollings, the orange glow of the park lamps trailing her path longer than the 8 years most she'd ruled Maple Grove. That night, Marcus returned home. Morning at 7:30 sharp, she reported to the County's Public Works Depot. He paused by his building that smelled of the one that had outlasted every citation. Her uniform wasn't the tailored blazer she once wore. The light flared brighter than he remembered, washing the yard in gold. Glared in the sun. He thought of his father's letter again. She used to wield like sometimes you won't have to fight back by a broom and a trash grabber. Just stand and let the first time a resident recognized her, she almost dropped it. You were right, Dad. Aren't you? Across the street, the woman began. A motion light blinked on. Karen, catching a new mailbox plate on the curb. She said softly, and bent to pick up another gum wrapper. The wind rustled through the trees. The humiliation felt unbearable. Carrying laughter from distant houses as they passed. Neighbors talking, doors closing, even honked twice, mocking the rhythm of the old HOA same community that once divided itself now hummed with quiet every sound of laughter. And for the first time since the slap that started today, the noise dulled. Marcus Ellison felt the world she worked, the more she noticed how quiet the world could be when she wasn't talking over. He took a slow breath. She began to learn the names of the other workers. Let the door close softly behind him. A retired janitor with kind eyes and steady. A teenager doing community hours for skipping school. Its light stretching down the street about where even shadows had learned their place. They just cared that she showed up on time and didn't leave extra trash for them. In their blunt, wordless way, they treated her like an equal. That unfamiliar balance unsettled her at first, then started to feel like air after drowning. One afternoon, while painting over graffiti on a roadside retaining wall, Marla handed her a bottle of water and said, You ever think about going back? Karen squinted against the sun. Back where? To whatever it was that got you in trouble. Karen shook her head. There's nothing to go back to. Only forward, Marla smiled. Then forward it is. When her shift ended that day, Karen didn't drive straight home. She parked outside the Maple Grove gate and sat watching the neighborhood from a distance. The new board had installed a public bulletin kiosk where the old violation notices box used to stand. Now it displayed community garden schedules and a flyer for a Neighbors Helping Neighbors cleanup. She watched as families pinned notes, child care swaps, free tomatoes, lost and found keys. She realized that the same structure she'd once weaponized had become something better precisely because she wasn't in it anymore. Judge Marcus Ellison hadn't seen Karen since sentencing. He'd signed her restitution receipts as part of court procedure, but otherwise kept his distance. Until one late spring morning when fate, or maybe fairness, put them on the same stretch of highway cleanup duty. He'd volunteered quietly with the new community outreach program his task force had started. When he stepped out of the county van, gloves in hand, he froze for a half-second. There she was, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, vest streaked with paint, bent over collecting litter from the grass. She looked up, startled. "Judge Ellison." "Mrs. Hollings." For a moment, neither spoke. Cars whooshed by, wind tugging at the orange vests. Then Marcus said, "Didn't expect to see you here." "They assigned me the stretch near the old exit." "Guess it's poetic," she said with a faint, self-aware laugh. He nodded. "How've you been managing?" "Learning," she said simply. "Turns out when you can't order anyone around, you have to listen. It's different." He studied her face, not the defiant mask from that day outside the courthouse, but something quieter. The arrogance had burned off, leaving a woman shaped by consequence. "You kept your light," he said. She frowned. "What light?" "The one on your porch." "The solar lamp!" "I noticed they didn't remove it during inspection." Her eyes softened. "I thought about throwing it away. Then I figured maybe it should stay, to remind me what I couldn't see before." They worked side by side for an hour without speaking again, pulling trash from the ditch, the sound of plastic bags snapping in the wind. Before leaving, Karen said, "Judge Ellison, I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm sorry for all of it. For the slap, for the letters, for thinking rules made me right." He met her gaze. "Apologies only matter if they turn into habits?" She nodded. "I'm trying." "I can tell," he said and offered his hand. She hesitated, then shook it, briefly, firmly, like the closing of a case both had already accepted. Over the next year, Maple Grove slowly transformed. The new board launched a mentorship program teaching residents how HOA finances worked. The garden that once drew Karen's fines for unauthorized plantings became the heart of weekend gatherings. Marcus visited often, sometimes in his robe straight from court, sometimes in jeans and a cap. He helped mediate disputes before they ever reached City Hall. People started calling him Judge Marcus instead of Your Honor. In June, the county unveiled a new policy package inspired by Maple Grove's collapse, the Fair Community Act. It required annual public audits and open voting procedures for every homeowners association in the county. The press credited Marcus Ellison's testimony as the spark, but he always corrected them. "It wasn't my words," he'd say. "It was our lesson." For Karen, the lesson became daily practice. After completing her community service hours, she applied for part-time clerical work at the same county office she'd once cursed. The supervisor who interviewed her glanced at her file, then asked, "Why should we take a risk on you?" Karen answered honestly. "Because I know what happens when people like me think they're above paperwork." She got the job. She handled filing, scheduling, nothing glamorous, but she did it with a kind of reverence for detail that surprised her co-workers. When someone forgot to sign a form, she didn't scold. She quietly walked it back for correction. Each small act felt like stitching something back together inside herself. At lunch, she sometimes walked past the courthouse plaza where the incident had begun. The space looked smaller now, almost gentle in daylight. She'd sit on the same stone railing and watch people cross the steps. Lawyers, defendants, clerks, all moving within the rules she'd once twisted. One afternoon, she noticed a small bronze plaque newly installed by the entrance. In recognition of civic patience and accountability, "May the law serve the just as well as the fallen." Dedicated to Judge Marcus Ellison and the citizens of Maple Grove, she traced the edge of the plaque with her fingertips and whispered, "Good." By the second autumn after the verdict, Maple Grove hosted a festival to celebrate its renewal. Food trucks lined the parkway, children painted fences in bright colors, and a jazz trio played under string lights. The mayor unveiled a small stone bench inscribed, "Community means everyone." Marcus sat nearby, smiling as kids climbed over the backrest. Mrs. Jenkins handed him a slice of peach pie. "Never thought we'd see the day," she said. He laughed. "Neither did I." From across the crowd, he saw Karen standing quietly near the lemonade stand, wearing a plain blue dress, her vest replaced by a volunteer badge. She was helping a little boy tie balloons to a table leg, patient and soft-spoken. When their eyes met, she lifted a hand. Not a wave exactly, but a simple acknowledgement. He nodded back. That was enough. The band began to play a slow, warm tune. As the sun sank, the solar lamps around the park flickered on, new ones, hundreds of them, lining the paths like fireflies. Marcus watched their glow stretch across the grass and thought about the first light, the one on his porch, that had started everything. It still burned each night, a quiet beacon reminding him that justice doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it repairs what pride has broken. He turned to Mrs. Jenkins. "You know, I used to think fairness was a verdict," he said. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it's a daily chore, like mowing the lawn. If you stop tending it, weeds take over," she chuckled. "Then here's hoping we all keep our mowers sharp." Later that evening, after the festival lights dimmed and families drifted home, Marcus walked the length of the park alone. The air smelled of cut grass and charcoal. He paused at the new bench and sat down, looking toward the row of houses glowing softly under the lamps. A figure approached, the faint crunch of gravel announcing her. Karen carried a small envelope. "I wasn't sure I'd find you," she said. "I live 5 minutes away," he replied. "Hard to miss a festival this big." She offered the envelope. "It's the final restitution payment. Certified check. I wanted to hand-deliver it." He took it, nodded. "Thank you. I also wanted to say, I joined the new Fair Community Outreach as a volunteer. They needed someone who knows how HOAs can go wrong." "That's good work," he said. "I figured maybe if I help other people listen sooner, they won't end up like me." He smiled faintly. "That's how redemption works. Quiet, not loud." She exhaled, relieved. "Then I'll keep it quiet." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a child chase a stray balloon down the hill. The last light of evening faded into a soft blue dusk. Before leaving, Karen turned back once. "Judge Ellison, that day outside the courthouse, I thought you'd ruin me. Instead, you taught me how to see." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Maybe you just needed the mirror." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you." He watched her walk away, the orange glow of the park lamps trailing her path like forgiveness in motion. That night, Marcus returned home. The neighborhood was quiet, dew already forming on the lawns. He paused by his porch lamp, the one that had outlasted every citation and inspection, and pressed the switch. The light flared brighter than he remembered, washing the yard in gold. He thought of his father's letter again. "Sometimes you won't have to fight back. Just stand and let the truth show what it really hits," he whispered. "You were right, Dad. Across the street." A motion light blinked on, catching a new mailbox plate on the curb. Maple Grove, a fair community. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying laughter from distant houses, neighbors talking, doors closing, lives continuing. The same community that once divided itself now hummed with quiet unity. And for the first time since the slap that started it all, Marcus Ellison felt the world settle into balance. Not perfect, but honest. He took a slow breath, stepped inside, and let the door close softly behind him. Outside, the lamp kept shining, steady, patient, unblinking, its light stretching down the street where even shadows had learned their place.